Hey everyone, welcome to The Explainer. I am so excited you're here today because we're diving into something that literally touches all of our lives in some way, yet it is so frequently misunderstood. We're exploring the neurobiology of addiction. For the longest time, we've thought of addiction as just a simple lack of willpower or a string of bad choices. But today, we're going to look at the hard, clinical data. We're going to see exactly how compulsive behaviors cause a literal, physical rewiring of the human brain. So, let me ask you something right off the bat. What does a severe drug habit actually have in common with your smartphone? You know that feeling, right? That almost compulsive need to reach into your pocket and just start scrolling, even when you consciously really don't want to? Well, the answer lies right in our neurobiology. The exact same chemical pathways that drive clinical substance abuse are absolutely at play in our everyday digital habits. Here is our roadmap for today's explainer. We're going to cover the brain disease model, dopamine and molecular switches, the 3 stages of addiction, the adolescent vulnerability trap, and wrap it up with rewiring the addicted brain. Let's get into it. Section 1. The brain disease model. For centuries, society pretty much viewed addiction as a moral failing, right? Or just a criminal issue. But science has brought us this massive paradigm shift. Clinically speaking, addiction is a severe, chronic stage of a substance use disorder, and it's characterized by a really substantial loss of self-control. People are engaging in these compulsive behaviors despite a desperate desire to stop, and despite catastrophic consequences in their lives. So it's not a choice anymore, it is an acquired disease of the brain. And honestly, the sheer scale of this disease is staggering. Research shows that 8 to 10% of people 12 or older in the US are addicted to alcohol or other drugs. To put that into perspective, that's roughly 20 to 22 million people. It costs society hundreds of billions of dollars every single year in healthcare and lost productivity. That is exactly why understanding the underlying biology of this disease is absolutely crucial for all of us.
Section 2. Dopamine and molecular switches.
All right, let's zoom in a bit, down to the microscopic level to see what's actually driving this. You've definitely heard of dopamine. It's the brain's go-to neurotransmitter for pleasure and motivation. Normally, when you do something rewarding, like eating an amazing meal, dopamine gets released in this area called the mesolimbic pathway, specifically flooding into the nucleus accumbens. It basically tells your brain, hey, that was awesome, let's totally do that again. But addictive substances and behaviors essentially hijack this entire system. They create these massive, totally unnatural spikes in dopamine that just completely overwhelm our natural reward circuitry. But here's the thing. Our brains are highly adaptive. So when the brain is constantly getting flooded with all this excess dopamine, it tries to protect itself by reducing the number of dopamine receptors. We call this downregulation. The result? It pushes you into a state known as anhedonia. Basically, the reward system becomes incredibly insensitive. Not only do you start needing more of this substance just to feel normal, but everyday natural rewards like hanging out with loved ones or watching a beautiful sunset literally lose their motivational power. Life without the substance just feels dull and empty. And that brings us to this fascinating, highly specific protein called delta phosphate. You can think of this as the master molecular switch for addiction. As a person repeatedly uses drugs or engages in compulsive behaviors, even things like compulsive running, actually, delta phosphate accumulates in the neurons of the nucleus accumbens. And it's an extraordinarily stable protein. So it doesn't just wash away when the behavior stops. It sticks around for a long time, initiating sustained changes in gene expression. It's the actual mechanism that takes a short-term acute response and gradually converts it into long-term addiction plasticity. It literally changes the physical blueprint of the brain.
Section 3. The 3 stages of addiction.
So how does all that microscopic rewiring actually manifest in human behavior? Well, it happens in a cycle of 3 recurring stages. Stage 1 is binge and intoxication. Through basic Pavlovian conditioning, the brain starts associating certain environments, people, or moods directly with the drug. These conditioned cues trigger incredibly fast surges of dopamine before the drug is even taken, and that creates intense cravings, driving the binge. Then, as the direct effects of the drug wear off, the user enters stage 2, withdrawal and negative affect. Remember earlier when we talked about those dopamine receptors disappearing? Well, at the exact same time, the brain's stress networks, this sort of anti-reward system in the extended amygdala, become dangerously overactive. This causes severe anxiety, restlessness, and just awful dysphoria. The crucial point we have to understand here is that the person isn't taking the drug to get high anymore.
They are desperately taking it just to escape the agonizing distress of withdrawal. Which leads us right into the third and final stage, preoccupation and anticipation. A lot of people wonder, why can't they just exert a little willpower? Well, it's because the prefrontal cortex, that's the part of your brain in charge of executive function, decision-making, and impulse control, has physically weakened. The impaired signaling in this region literally ruins self-regulation. The brain's brakes have essentially been cut, making relapse almost inevitable without the right intervention. Section 4. The adolescent vulnerability trap. Okay, so let's apply this clinical biology to a massive modern issue. Why are young people uniquely at risk here? In the adolescent brain, there is a fundamental developmental mismatch going on. The limbic system, which drives emotions, sensation-seeking, and hunting for social rewards, matures very early on. But the prefrontal cortex, the exact region we just learned acts as the brain's brakes for impulse control and delayed gratification, is the absolute last area to mature. In fact, it often doesn't fully develop until the mid-20s. Enter modern digital platforms. Social media algorithms are meticulously designed with what are basically casino-like features: fast-paced interactions, sudden, unpredictable surprises, and personalized endless feeds. They are straight-up dopamine-inducing machines, and they perfectly exploit that teenage brain imbalance we just talked about. They offer massive sensory and social excitement exactly when the adolescent's biological impulse control is still, well, under construction. It is a perfect recipe for compulsive behavior. And honestly, the threat goes way beyond just neurobiology. Researchers categorize the harms of social media into the 4 C's. First, content. Unlike movies, there are no age labels or content reviews on these platforms. Second, contact. Lonely kids seeking acceptance are heavily targeted for online extortion. Third is conduct. Staring at a screen constantly distances people from reality, leading to severe cyberbullying and a total loss of real-life interaction. And lastly, contract. The exploitation of adolescent user data and just relentless commercial exposure. It creates an environment that chains rather than connects our youth. Section 5. Rewiring the addicted brain. Now let's pivot, because there is incredibly good news here. The brain's plasticity absolutely works in both directions. Recovery is a physical, biological process, but it takes time. In the first 1 to 2 weeks of detox, the body eliminates the substance, accompanied by severe withdrawal. From 30 to 90 days, early recovery kicks in. Dopamine starts trying to restore itself, though cravings are still super strong. But look at that 3 to 12-month mark. This is the era of neural rewiring. Brand new brain pathways physically form, emotional regulation comes back, and impulse control improves. Finally, past the 1-year mark, we enter long-term recovery, where sustained sobriety leads to a dramatically reduced risk of relapse. 14 months. Now that is a highly specific and very important number. According to clinical studies, brain scans actually show that after exactly 14 months of sobriety, brain function significantly improves and normalizes. All that damage from the molecular switches and the dopamine downregulation, it can be reversed. Healing is biologically possible, but it requires patience, a strong support system, and cognitive behavioral tools to really help those new pathways grow. Which brings us to our final thought for the day. We've seen just how powerful the brain's reward system is, how easily it can be hijacked by chemicals or algorithms, but we've also seen how it can heal through neuroplasticity. Whether we are talking about a clinical substance disorder or just your daily relationship with your smartphone, your brain is constantly wiring and rewiring based on what you do today. So I leave you with this. How will you use the science of neuroplasticity to intentionally rewire your own daily habits? Thank you so much for joining me on this explainer, and keep learning.